murdered by a gunman at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Six adults were also murdered at that school. Our hearts and prayers go out to the families. And I'm not going to rush through this. It's a little bit lengthy, so I'm going to take my time with this. But there are two issues that need to be addressed. Number one is mental illness, identifying, treatment, and separation of students with mental issues and keeping them separated from the mainstream schools as it used to be. And I'll talk more on that issue in my next week's show. We're going to focus on the gun control, because that's what immediately, the same day that this was announced, that's what the commentators were talking about, was gun control, gun control. All right, so let's go through this. And I'm basing a lot of this information off of a police1.com article, and it was written by the editor-in-chief, Don Wiley. Police One News poses this question: should teachers be trained by police, let me start that again, quote, should teachers be trained by police firearm instructors? Should at least one teacher on every floor of every school in America be armed, trained, qualified, and ready and willing to end a deadly threat in their school? Should American law enforcement train and prepare civilian educators to take immediate action against armed attacks? So this is what this article is, these are the questions that this article addresses. In the aftermath of this incident, there will be a lot of pressure on politicians at every level to propose and pass more stringent gun control laws, but it's also missing the mark on a much more important issue. Every school in the nation conducts 2 or 3 fire drills per year, despite the fact that not one single child has died from a school fire anywhere in North America in well over half a century. Yet, we almost universally ignore the threat which really is claiming the lives of our kids. Active shooters, like some 20-year-old whose name merits no mention, I think it merits serious consideration to have at least one teacher on every floor of every school in America be armed, trained, annually qualified, and ready and willing to end a deadly threat in their school. So you see, this has given us something else to think about rather than taking away the gun rights of citizens. Let's go on. When asked this question, some experts, each of whom has taught extensively on the topic of active shooters, had this to say. Dan Marco said, quote, I believe in facing modern threats with modern solutions. I believe in armed pilots, armed teachers, armed judges, and armed fill in the blank. I believe we need good people who are good shots, who are armed in today's world. Dick Fairburn said, quote, the answer is more guns and more trained citizens. But some people in our country will immediately try to ban guns, inanimate objects, simple tools. We don't have enough police officers to protect every school or school bus. So, I vote for training and equipping volunteers, maybe a nationwide corps of retired cops. They're already trained and equipped and background checked. Makes sense, doesn't it? Ken Hardesty said, Americans can no longer depend upon legislation to defend them from all who intend to do them harm. And added that while He doesn't advocate taking the law into one's own hands. He does advocate for people taking personal responsibility for their survival and well-being. He said Robert Heinlein was correct in the statement, quote, "An armed society is a polite society. Gun-free zones are an open invitation for homicidal maniacs. Armed civilians of any kind, teachers included, will no doubt be met with trepidation. I believe some of the fears can be diminished through a comprehensive selection and training process. Individuals selected must be mature, motivated, and above all else, volunteers. Prior to arming them physically, they must be armed mentally and indoctrinated with not only up-to-date use of force laws, but also with the unwavering mindset that their immediate action in the face of evil is saving the lives of others." Here's a summary of shootings. In February, 17-year-old T.J. Lane murdered 3 students sitting at a cafeteria table before school. In April, a former nursing student named Juan Elgo opened fire at Oika University near the Oakland International Airport, killing 7 people. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing these names. I do the best I can. Okay, so he killed 7 people, a college, a high school, and now an elementary school, all in 2012. 15 years ago, in 1998, the total number of child fatalities in American schools reached what was then an all-time high. 35 children died that year in gun and non-gun related incidents. The next year, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold murdered 12 classmates and 1 teacher, wounding 26 others, before killing themselves in the school's library. In 2007, Song Hoi Cho killed 32 people and himself on Virginia Tech campus in Blacksburg, Virginia. The following year, it was Northern Illinois University. The proposal of arming teachers is provocative. The selection process should be rigorous and ongoing, perhaps in the same way we arm our airline pilots. Those involved in the program would be vetted volunteers. And then he asks the question, should American law enforcement train and prepare civilian educators to take immediate action against armed attacks? All right. I think they bring out some excellent ideas, potential solutions. I certainly know that our country desperately wants to protect everybody from everything harmful, but that's impossible. So we've got to come up with reasonable solutions, and taking away the rights of citizens is not one of them. And so going on that thread, now this is a separate issue, that's the end of that article. Here's something else though. Do legally armed citizens prevent crime? The 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has declared the Illinois ban against legally armed citizens to be unconstitutional. Let me read that again. The 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has declared the Illinois ban against legally armed citizens to be unconstitutional. On December 11th, the 7th United States Circuit Court of Appeals struck down the statewide ban on civilians carrying concealed weapons in the state, mandating that lawmakers write a new law that legalizes concealed carry within 180 days. In the court's majority opinion, Judge Richard Posner wrote that the United States Supreme Court, quote, has decided that the Second Amendment confers a right to bear arms for self-defense, which is as important outside the home as inside, end quote. The Seventh Circuit decision addressed a couple of separate cases, but one in particular is telling. Mary Shepard, an Illinois resident with no criminal record who is licensed to carry a concealed handgun in 2 other states, was prohibited by Illinois law from carrying a firearm at the time she and an 83-year-old co-worker were viciously attacked by a 6'3" 245-pound man with a violent past and criminal record. It's sounding familiar. I think we're getting some common themes in all these cases. She was lucky to survive. Her injuries required extensive surgery and physical therapy. Judge Posner said in the majority decision, quote, "One doesn't have to be a historian to realize that a right to keep and bear arms for personal self-defense in the 18th century could not rationally have been limited to the home. A Chicagoan is a good deal more likely to be attacked on a sidewalk than in his apartment or on the 35th floor." According to the NRA, firearms are used for personal protection more than 2 million times a year, and that the presence of a firearm without a shot being fired prevents crime in many instances. So according to the NRA, firearms are used for personal protection more than 2 million times a year, and that the presence of a firearm without a shot being fired prevents crime in many instances. And then there's a video up on the website of some Australians warning Americans not to give up their gun rights as they did. And you'll see some personal stories about that. Now, when I spoke, going back to the Sandy Hook thing, I spoke with someone who works with and has during her career as a teacher's aide with the severely mentally challenged. I know a couple years ago she worked in a padded classroom. The walls and everything were padded because there was such a danger that these children could hurt themselves that they had to make a padded classroom. Anyway, but here are some comments that she made. Some of the reports that we got initially was that the shooter at Sandy Hook Elementary School had autism. And she said, well, I knew that wasn't right. She says, because usually autistic children will not harm others or harm themselves. And then, of course, it came out. I said, well, the latest TV version report said that he had Asperger's. And she says, well, that makes more sense. She says, because they can fly off the handle. Anything can trigger them to become violent. And so I'm going to look more into Asperger's because I'm hearing a lot of other reports now where it's being flipped around. So I want to look more into Asperger's and do a follow-up report with you to see what I find out about that. And of course, you know, in any kind of situation like this, some faulty information is going to get out there, or inaccurate information. Look, all these news outlets are just trying to keep you informed as best they can.